Do what you got to do.
Okay. You have in your packet minutes of our December 17th meeting. Any adjustments, corrections, additions? There be none, is there a motion to approve?
Motion.
Thank you. Any objections? Seeing and hearing none, the motion is carried. Okay. Come now to board governance. Are there any issues or anything any member wishes to declare, either in...
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
I have two items before the board, tab 29, license 3487, and within tab 119, renewal that I have interest in, so I need to declare that. And I will be speaking on behalf of tab 29, so I'll recuse myself from voting on that.
Okay.
29, oh, sorry.
I have 29. What was the other one?
It's tab 119, license 421 and 3487.
Tab 119, what you said?
Yeah, it's delegated consent for renewals.
Oh, these are your renewals.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's one, the other tab 19, or tab 29 is a third waiver request.
And would you care for us to extract the items in 119 so you can vote on the rest, or are you just going to recuse yourself?
I will defer to staff recommendations regarding conflict. I'm happy to recuse myself or to pull them out separately at the discretion of the folks that want to maintain transparent governance, including myself.
We're all for transparency. Would you take a look through there and see if there's anything that you really want to vote on? Otherwise,
I think I would be good to recuse myself in the interest of expediency.
Thank you. Okay. We come now to the portion of our program which is called public testimony. At this point, I'd like to invite anyone in the room or anyone on the phone to come forward with any issue they wish to discuss with the board. The only proviso is that it must be an issue not already on the agenda. So, anyone care to come forward?
Question of clarification, if I could, Director. I see that we're in the tab here, 96, under C, the International Hotel and Bars. So,
excuse me, sir. I'm sorry, could you sit and start and speak into the microphone, push the button so that we can get your question on the record?
Can you guys kill your mic?
Thank you.
Are we working?
Push the big button in the middle.
Well, I seem to push the talk sign. Okay, I guess like I was asking a second ago, with kind of a point of clarification, because not to speak on any items directly on the agenda, is that under tab 96, my license 556 to the International Hotel and Bar exists. So I'm here to speak on behalf of a administrative code. So that kind of directly reflects to an MOB that was received from our beverage dispensary license. So I don't want to do a conflict if I'm not allowed to speak on that behalf.
Counselor, what do you think?
I think it's a little unclear. It sounds to me like the two issues are related. When you say administrative code, are you talking about a regulation?
Yeah, one specifically that was written to us in the defense of a NOV.
And is that related to the item that you have on the agenda? Tab 96?
No, not under tab 96. Oh, well, I take that back. You looks like you have listed here, because this says renewal applications of licensees 1718 and notice of violation. So there was a notice of violation that was put in on November of 2017. So that's under this tab 96. Would that be specific to my conversation?
I think so. It probably makes more sense for you and the board to deal with that all at once, as it appears on the agenda, that we can get all the facts in.
Okay, so I should just wait till we get to 96.
Yeah, thank you.
Perfect. Absolutely good. Thanks for that clarification. I push this off.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Paul Thomas with Alaska Cash Liquor here in town, and I'm also the Paul Thomas with Alaska Cash Liquor here in town, and I'm also the chairman of the board for State Chart. So I, again, might be better at the end. I have some minimum operating requirement comments, which is not actually a tab, but it's in your mail tab at the end. Do you want to save it till then?
The mail tab is just correspondence which has come in, not action or agenda items before the board.
Okay.
So if you wish to comment on related topic, go for it.
So I guess my comments are on the minimum operating requirements, particularly for new license, and I was hoping that the board could maybe give guidance to staff that if a new license is acquired during November or December, that they're not going to have to try and meet the minimum operating requirements, the 240 hours we got last year. If they're given a license in December, it's almost impossible for them to hit 240 hours. They shouldn't be up for a first waiver and filing penalties because they didn't get stuff in before November 30th if they didn't even have a license. So I guess my request is that that the board gives staff clarification that if something comes in November or December and an issue is licensed, they don't have to meet that minimum operating requirements. They don't have to use up one of their waivers. They don't have to pay penalties because they can't make the 240 hours when they were given a time that just, in some cases, isn't even physically possible.
Thank you. We're not sitting here like dummies, but the whole purpose of this is to accept information.
I got it. I got it.
But thank you.
So one other thing that I might just hand out, and it's in the alcohol directory now, but it came out last. This is Char's position on the repeal of the ABC board and the MCB board. Can I just hand those out?
I got it.
Thank you.
Almost made a mistake there. Thank you.
Okay. So, excuse me, through the chair, I think to echo comments made by Mr. Thomas, as a licensee, just generally speaking, I would also echo the need to review some of the administrative procedures with respect to streamlining and timing considerations and what amounts to potentially fairly onerous administrative penalties or delays that seem to be out of proportion to actions or inaction. So I think just generally speaking, I think it would behoove our body to take a look at those procedures administratively in the future at some point. So I think for the sake of making us a more streamlined and efficient and user-friendly organization.
Thank you. Other comments? Anyone else to speak to us this morning? Anyone on the line?
The conference is no longer in listen-only mode.
Anyone on the line? Anyone on the line wishing to join us for public testimony?
Yes, this is Matt Tomter.
Hi, Matt. Go ahead.
Good morning. Good morning. Let's see. What I'm calling in about was just spoken about, and I'm requesting that the board clarifies either through a directive to the director or through a regulation project that when a new license is issued after November 20, that the minimum what's that? That the minimum operating. Can you hear me okay?
No.
I'm sorry, can you hear me okay? Is this better?
Yes, much.
All right. What I'm asking for is that the board provides direction to the director through a regulation project that when a new license is issued after November 20th, that the minimum operating requirements for the calendar year is automatically waived without requirement of additional paperwork or penalty to the licensee. Can you guys hear me okay?
The last part, so, but generally, yes.
Well, what was asked, the person that spoke before me basically said almost the same thing. And the issue is I was issued a license on December 26th for Package Store, my Eagle River location. And I was told that I would have to fill out a waiver form because I wouldn't be able to meet the 30-day requirements. And then because my waiver form was turned in by November 30th, that I would be fined $1,000 for a total of $1,750 fine for accepting a license the last 4 days of the year, which was brand new. So I'm requesting, I just don't think that's right, and I think the rules being applied inappropriately. I'd like to request that the board provide direction or directive to the inspector or through a regulation project that when a license is issued after November 20th, the minimum operating requirements for that calendar year are waived.
Understood. Understood, Matt. Thank you for the input.
Thank you.
Anyone else wish to discuss an item not on the agenda?
Yeah, this is Sarah Oates, President and CEO of Alaska Char. I think some of the echoing is coming because people who are listening in telephonically have their phones on speakerphone. So if people could mute their phones and or take it off of speakerphone, that might help with some of the feedback.
Sarah, you're just breaking up terribly. Are you on a landline or a cell phone?
I'm on a cell phone.
I think it's all right,
but
the last guy was breaking up too.
Yeah.
I think people have their phones on speakerphone.
Yeah, it may be at our end because everybody's turned their phone off, except their mic off, except the one for phone line. Try it.
Can you hear me now?
Sounds like a Verizon commercial, but yes.
Too bad they're not paying. This is Sarah Oates, President and CEO of Alaska Char.
Totally jacked up.
Hold on one
Okay.
second. It's still good.
You said like $2,000 fine.
Any ideas, Director?
Go try to call the helpline.
Okay.
Yeah, well, like, I've got a license.
Let's go on pause for a few minutes. We're going to try and get help on this because it seems to be the incoming one. Sorry, sir.
Okay.
Beginning right here.
Mr. Chairman, it's Bobby. So these public comments, I think we just take notes, and it's not a Q&A. It's just the time we hear comments and put, some of these items on future agendas. So I think we got what they said. So I don't know if unless she has more to add, other than what a couple of people said.
I have no idea what Sarah's about to tell us.
No.
The other is some of the information that we're taking here, we can take action, which is not agenda. For example, the issue that Matt raised, and Paul, if we want to start a regulation, we can do that. It's just we can't, because the item was an agenda, this is public discussion. We can certainly take some actions. Some of the things suggested.
Anyone out there on the phone, if you are listening to us over your phone, if you don't have your phone on mute, if you could put it on mute, that may help as well. Sometimes additional feedback comes back because of the line. So.
Are you waiting for more comments, or Sarah?
Sarah, are you still online?
Yeah, I'm here.
You want to try now? Maybe now that people muted their phones, it may be better.
Okay. I assume you got my name and title for the record. I would just...
There's some wires right now. Okay.
Yeah, we should do that.
Try it again.
Try again?
Okay, Sarah, try it again.
Okay. I would just like to very quickly echo the comments that were already made regarding minimum operating requirements, except to also add that the only other option given was to delay issuance of the license until January and thus disallow the new licensee from being able to serve or sell alcohol during the holiday period, which is a huge money-making opportunity that new licensees need to be able to take advantage of in our current economic climate. So I would, again, echo that that the board either provide direction or open a regulation project on this issue. I would also like to just quickly state you already received my email comment that Paul Thomas passed out to all of you, but just to state for the record that Alaska Char is opposed to the dissolution of the ABC board and the Marijuana Control Board. We think that there are consistency reasons and public health, safety, and business reasons regulation of the alcohol industry. And then I would also just like to note for the record that the Alaska State Fair's alternating premises request is still not on this agenda, and I would ask that the board urge the staff to place it on the April agenda because they've been asking for this since August. And then my last testimony is from me as an individual and not representing CHAR. I would just like to thank Bobby Evans for your service. Well, I guess possibly representing CHAR too, but thank you for your service to the ABC board. I had the pleasure of working very closely with you for a few years, so I appreciate everything that you did with me when in my former role with AMCO, and thanks for your service to the state. That's all. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Sarah. Anyone else?
I do have one thing, if it's okay.
Is this a rebuttal?
No, it's not a rebuttal. It's
Bobby?
an actual just random thing that I was told to tell the board, or the staff, from a restaurant down in Kenai. I guess maybe I won't say it. But he told me to tell the board he's had nothing but, I mean, not board, the staff, about things like this. He's had nothing but great results and was thrilled with the staff's response and how quickly they were in responding to him and all his questions and thought it was an easy process. And anyway, he just wanted to thank you through me. So. The person? Does it matter? Yeah, okay. All right.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak in public comment? Okay. As is our custom, we will keep the opportunity for public comment available all through the meeting. So if somebody has an issue they wish to bring forward that is not on the agenda, please just give it their attention, and we'll be happy to schedule you in. At this point, I'd like to invite the director's report.
The conference is now in listen-only mode.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We were very sad to lose Craig Douglas, the administrative officer for AMCO. Probably he was there for more than 3 years, but certainly, or for about 3 years, but certainly about the entire 2 years of my tenure. He accepted a new position in the Department of Transportation and has left AMCO, and we have made an offer to a new individual and are waiting. But we were very sad to lose Craig. He was very helpful to all of us. We were not granted permission to fill the regulations specialist position at the end of 2018. The commissioner and I agreed to reevaluate the situation after Governor Dunleavy's new budget proposal was released, and his FY20 budget does include the regulation specialist, so I will be requesting permission to hire that position. I have a long, couple-page report on the situation with ARMS and Aspen that I've briefed the chair on in the past, and so I'm not going to read the whole thing, but ARMS and Aspen are databases used by law enforcement agencies for case management, crime reporting, processing of citations and criminal cases, access to criminal justice information, and collaboration with other law enforcement. And access to these databases has been available to our investigative personnel for many years. In the case of Aspen, going back to when the ABC board was housed in the Department of Revenue, which was prior to 2003. ARMS is a newer database, so it hasn't been that long. At the beginning of November, that our access to ARMS and Aspen was going to be removed in 30 days, and that has created many difficulties for our investigative staff. I've tried to work with both the previous commissioner and the current commissioner of Commerce on this issue and the commissioner of Public Safety, but we've been unable to find a successful solution. So we're sort of in a holding pattern. The idea that the investigative unit will be shifted into Department of Law could change the situation. It's not entirely clear. No details have been given about that potential change at this point. But if you have any particular questions after reading what's in my report, Chief Fulcher is on the phone and can answer questions about that. But this has hamstrung our investigators' ability to perform their statutory requirements, which include criminal enforcement of Title 11, parts of Title 11, Title 4, and parts of Title 17.
Through the chair, to Director McConnell, how difficult is it to request statutorily required criminal background checks interagency? Like if instead of doing them with our own staff, how onerous or difficult would it be to request the same information through Department of Public Safety?
So through the chair, Mr. Brady, just to clarify, this doesn't relate to the background checks that we do on licensees for both alcohol and marijuana. Those background checks, we collect the fingerprints and we forward them over to the Department of Public Safety along with fingerprint feeds. They send back the criminal history record. So that's not affected by this. We continue to do that. That process is working just fine. In this situation, the Department of Public Safety has offered to provide us with information out of ARMS or Aspen that we may need on a particular investigation. But first of all, that information, it takes several days for them to get it to us, so it doesn't allow us to react to situations that are immediately in front of us. And additionally, we have to they have to kind of approve that we're doing the proper investigation, and that's not really appropriate because, we have the authority to do criminal enforcement, and we don't need anybody's oversight. Our investigators are commissioned officers. They all have Alaska Police Standards Council certifications. So the sort of asking for this ARMS or Aspen information that may or may not be provided within a couple of days isn't, it's a stopgap measure, but it's not really a permanent solution for the situation. And we do appreciate that DPS has offered this to us, but again, it's not a permanent solution.
Through the chair, I think, to follow up on that, since was it November 30th notice?
They sent us a letter on November 1st and removed access on December 1st.
Okay, so you haven't had to deal with the ramifications of this operationally as of yet?
I mean, certainly, no, we've gone so it's been 2.5 months, and some of our investigations have been hampered or delayed because of this. I mean, we're dealing with these ramifications.
Okay, so
yeah.
It's affecting. I was kind of curious as to, since it has been in effect then, how significantly that has affected investigations in a material sense.
I expect Commissioner Holscher could give you more information.
Thank you.
Director, two things. One is to thank you for summarizing this. You know, these agendas and the stuff we publish behind each of these items, very informative and have a tremendous amount of information. But I really appreciate that we summarize all that and bring it to an actionable form, understanding that all of us have read through all of the detail. And so we're in the interest not only of time, but in the interest of effectiveness. The way you approach this was welcome. The other is to note that this problem has now gone through 2 administrations. So it's not just the current commissioner or the current governor. It's something inherent in the system. And we really ought to get to the bottom of that and find out where actions are coming from. I've heard a number of suppositions and a number of rumors, but I don't really think we had anybody stand up and say, I'm the guy that made the decision, and here's why. And I think that would be very helpful before we start shooting in all directions, to coin a phrase.
Mr. Chair, the original letter was signed by Major Greenstreet. Major Greenstreet was the acting colonel for, which is the head of the Alaska State Troopers at the time. He, I believe a different person has been promoted to be colonel to become head of the Alaska State Troopers. So if you wish, I could request that individual to talk to the board.
I think that would be helpful.
You ready for me to move on?
Please.
He's here. Stay more here for a second. So all right. As I believe the board knows and much of the public knows, Governor Dunleavy has released his new budget, and there are 2 major changes that relate to the Alcoholic Beverage Control Board, the Marijuana Control Board, and AMCO. So by executive order, the governor has established a statewide investigator unit within the Department of Law, and I have attached the executive order to the packet for you to see. It consolidates most of the investigators from a number of different state departments, and it includes the AMCO investigators. So to develop an implementation plan with implementation in I have no details other than what I have read in the executive order. The other large change is that the governor has indicated his intention to introduce legislation to repeal the Alcoholic Beverage Control Board and marijuana with the intent of transferring the authority and responsibilities that the 2 boards now have to the Commissioner of the Department of Commerce, and the information that was provided to the staff was that this is to reduce the regulatory burden in efforts to expand entrepreneurialism, to allow alcohol and marijuana licenses to be processed more akin to that of professional licenses, and removing the limitations on the selection and appointment process of the director by the governor. As of last week and actually today, no legislation has yet been introduced, so we haven't seen exactly what that proposal will look like. So again, I have no additional information other than what I have shared with you.
Board questions?
Through the chair, or to the chair, just speaking generally on this proposal as a director and an industry member, the contention that alcohol and now marijuana be treated as other commodities or professions would be not in the public interest, and for that reason I'm vehemently, personally opposed to dissolution of these boards. I just wanted to put that on the record.
We're at a bit of a disadvantage in that there's no legislation yet introduced. when it is, I think the board ought to take a look at it and see if we wish to come up with a resolution, a recommendation to the governor.
I would make a motion that we, as a board, formally take a position that reaffirms the role of the board with respect to public health and business interests in the state. As a motion.
Second that.
Thank you. Did you get discussion? Barbie, you want to weigh in as you ride off? Rex? Okay. I can only echo the need for this. I think it's very telling that the first group to step up against is to reduce the burdens. As far as entrepreneurialism was the entrepreneurial group of Shaw. So perhaps there's something more to this. There's a motion before us. Any discussion?
Well, we'll write it. Yeah.
It's already been. So it's just a case of who do we publish this to.
Okay.
But if we accept this, then it's action of the board. Anyone opposed? This motion is carried. Director.
And Mr. Chair, once we do have draft legislation, would you like me to work with you to set up a special meeting for the board to review it?
I think that would make sense.
The last thing I'll say about the budget is that the governor's FY20 proposal does reduce AMCO's budget by $48,700 from the current year FY19 management plan. The cut is entirely from the travel budget, which leaves the remaining travel budget of $135,000. There are two significant bills particularly relating to alcohol regulation. One of them is SB 16. This was introduced by Senator McChickey. It creates a fair license, a performing arts theater license, and a concert permit. And it also addresses a tax bonding issue that is in the statutes of the department as well. A fair license would authorize a nonprofit organization that is at least 10 years old to sell beer and wine at regional fairs and other events held on fairgrounds, and it would resolve the issue for the market fair. As currently written, only one fair license per borough would be allowed. The Performing Arts Theater license is similar to the theater license that currently exists in regulation, with a significant difference that the legislation allows alcohol consumption within the audience viewing area, which is currently specifically prohibited in the regulation. This is apparently common in performing arts theaters around the country, but there is a concern about unaccompanied minors on licensed premises. I've inquired about how other states handle this. I haven't heard anything back, but in discussions about potential amendments, it looks like the concept that is actually desired is very similar to the kind of thing that happens at stadiums and arenas where there is a sort of a wet section and a dry section, and that seems to make sense. So I do anticipate that there are going to be amendments, and so we will see what those look like. The proposed concert permit would allow holders of recreational site licenses to apply for permits to sell beer and wine at events that don't qualify under the recreational site license. There is a hearing this afternoon in the Senate Labor and Commerce Committee, which I will have to step out for, so I will be stepping out at about 1:30, and folks will not be away too long. The Title IV rewrite bill, which last year was SB 76, has been reintroduced as SB 52, so we all have to get a new number into our heads. It's essentially the version that was passed in the Senate in the 2008 session with some minor modifications that have been reviewed and agreed to by the steering committee and Senator McChickey. And yesterday I did hand deliver the board's letter in support of this legislation to all legislators and a copy of the in your packet. As usual, a regulations project status spreadsheet is in your packet, and our next meeting is scheduled for April 29th and 30th in Anchorage. Applications must be complete and other documents for the board must be submitted to our office by April 12th in order to be in the board packet for and on that agenda. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Director. Any questions, comments? Okay, let's move on to board interpretations, controlling interest, which is tab 3. Director, you want to introduce?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So about a year ago, we had some pushback on the office's longstanding interpretation, and frankly, the board's longstanding interpretation of what is considered a controlling interest for the purposes of implementing AS 0411-040C, which states a person may not receive or transfer controlling interest in a liquor license except with written consent of the board. We brought what has been the longstanding interpretation of the office to the board in January of 2018, and the board asked a subcommittee to review the situation, and Mr. Leaf was the sole member of that subcommittee. Mr. Leaf, Ms. Oates, and I did meet, and Mr. Leaf had expressed that a significant concern is when control is consolidated rather than more spread out. And so we went back and reviewed all of the controlling interest transfers that have been brought before the board within the last 4 years. So 2015, 2016, 2017, and 2018. And what we discovered is that of the 168 controlling interest transfers that were brought before the board in those 4 years, only 5 of them appeared to spread control to more people than originally held control. So the vast majority of them were either the sort of the same number of people, but they were different people than had control over the license, or entirely, or it was fewer people. So going back to what we actually look at, has ownership of 50% of the license changed? Has a person who didn't used to own 50% now become an owner of 50% or more? Or has the number of people needed to create a majority of shares changed? And if the answer to any of those questions is yes, we consider it to be a change in controlling interest. There's feedback from a law firm that kind of makes it a lot more complicated. And I understand that in the realm of law and legal dealings, it can be more complicated than that, but I think the board needs to keep in mind that none of your staff, none of the AMCO staff are lawyers. None of them have training in law, none of them have training in corporate law, and so to make an interpretation that is so complicated that the staff has to go to law school really isn't going to work. So to me, looking at the 168 controlling interest transfers that have been brought before the board, it looks like the situation is working pretty well. But if the board wants to make a change, I would recommend that you consider doing it through a regulation project to allow the public to weigh in and move forward in that direction.
Thank you, Director. We happen to have an expert in the booth with us. Captain Reith was quoted here. Would you care to tell us what you really think?
So through the chair, this topic, no doubt about it, is complicated and has a lot of factors depending on the entity involved at the time, whatever the change in controlling interest is. Overall, when looking at the interpretation of the board historically, there doesn't seem to be a vast amount of complaint about the way the process is working. There are case-by-case events where a licensee has a concern about how the reporting goes or whether or not they should report that change in interest. And so I felt at the time it was better to take those one at a time and look at each unique circumstance rather than basically rewrite the whole interpretation of how we view those controlling interests. I'm very open to listen to any complaints or any unique circumstances out there, but in the nature of the number of changes we looked at, I believe it was 168 if I'm quoting that number correctly, yes. And we had, I think, 5 individuals that came forward with concerns about the interpretations. I felt it better in the board's interest in time and management to look at those individuals one at a time rather than rewrite the whole interpretation of how we look at those ownership percentages. Hopefully that makes sense.
It does. Thank you.
And to the chair, I think having personally been involved in this, what I consider another kind of administrative kerfluffle, I think 5 of my licenses were involved in some of those transfers. And it has to do, there's some additional complication that the director referred to that hasn't even been alluded to, and that's with respect to, I forget the preamble, but subchapter C corporation relative to subchapter S, an LLC, and the tax codes that the subchapter C corporation can own itself. And yeah, it really complicates things, and I was caught in this, and the part that I kind of want to voice a little bit of concern about, it'll be a 2-part thing, is one, like in order to do that transfer of controlling interest, it was effectively as administratively expensive as I had to reapply for all of my licenses and go through the public notice process. It cost me personally several $1,000s for basically the company owed me money, and I decided to take it in shares. And that triggered above 50%, even though, in fact, I had a controlling interest previous to that. So, personal experience, again, I think it gets to referring to my comments earlier about administrative burden and streamlining operations while maintaining control and governance of the industry. So, that's just a general comment. And I think, second, I think to echo Mr. Lee's comments, I think this is kind of in the category of if it's not broken, don't fix it. So I think there's really not a clean solution in my opinion.
Thank you. I was sorry for your loss.
Part of doing business.
But, yeah, I think the key here is the numbers, 5 out of 168, and for us to try and cobble a regulation or a policy that would cover all coming eventualities is just a waste of time. I like the fact that, well, while we're here as a board, we are the backstop for this and welcome anybody who is uncomfortable with the decision staff has made. So thank you for that, Director. And Captain, anything else? No. All right, let's move on to tab 4, which is shared tasting rooms. Here comes the future. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So at the October meeting of this body in Kenai, the board considered 2 different situations where multiple manufacturing licenses were held by the same licensee and were proposed to share licensed premises. One licensee was co-locating a brewery, distillery, and winery license at the same premises, and another licensee was co-locating a brewery and a winery license at the same premises. The board didn't have an issue with co-locating the manufacturing processes, but you did begin discussing the issue of shared tasting rooms, and you requested this issue be placed on this agenda, skipping the December meeting because Ms. Erickson was unable to attend that meeting. So you did request that this issue be placed on this agenda for additional discussion. I have provided in the tab the particular allowances of the brewery license for tasting, the winery license, and the distillery license in terms of the amounts of tasting. And I do understand that, or I have been told that at least one licensee may be on the phone and may wish to talk to you if you want to entertain comments.
Always welcome.
The conference is no longer in listen-only mode.
Okay, we are discussing shared tasting rooms.
But it's a different thing. I'm on a conference call for the alcohol control board.
No, you are in a conference call, and we just heard what you were saying. Could you mute your phone, please? Thank you. Okay, I understand there is someone who wishes to speak on shared tasting rooms.
Hi, Chairman Klein. This is Hassan Mohsen from Denali Brewing, and we are the license holder which Director McConnell was referring to with the 3 manufacturing licenses. I just wanted to make myself available in case you all had any questions, and maybe only make a quick comment with regard to just respectfully ask that as the board comes to a determination as to how they would like to proceed with the shared tasting room, please be sensitive to the fact that we've been operating our tasting room this way for 3 years, and as much as possible, we would appreciate consistency in terms of interpreting the statutes, which Director McConnell has presented to you guys.
Thank you, Susan. Before I open this up to Glenn, I did want to make a comment, and this comment is based on long experience on this, as well as an individual already has a tasting room. I think the issue here is the customer coming into this room and how we define how much that customer can be served from a series of manufacturing points, which is the manufacturing points are only germane, and that's how it got into the tasting room. But the key really is we set up all of these volume limits on customers who came into, whether it's a beer, winery, distillery, you can only have so many ounces of this product and so many of that product. And how do we meld that so that the responsibility still exists and we are defining what we consider to be a reasonable amount or a reasonable limit on what is served to the customer. Having said that, the problem is I can't find a common thread through it because there's a variance of actual pure ethanol in the standards we set. So oddly enough, the one for beer is the highest, which amounts to almost 2.5 ethanol. The distillery is the lowest at 1.5. So there's a range here, but I think that's what we have to work on and probably some advice to folks like Susan as to, okay, you can have folks in here, but here's the sum of what you can serve that person. Go ahead, Glenn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll try to be brief. I think maybe to Susan, I would perhaps, I'm not sure if you're still involved or what your capacity is with the Brewers Guild, the industry association that represents a lot of these licensees. But I would be curious to know what sorts of industry best practices you and other tasting room licensees have in place to kind of track those volume limits for customers. And I think maybe how those things are tracked may have some bearing on this discussion in a second. But, and also switching topics, actually, I'll let you address that if you'd like, Susan, Mr. Chair.
Susan, if you're still on, would you answer that?
I am. Thank you, Chair. Well, Mr. Brady, what we do here is we it starts very early on in the hiring process to ensure that the folks that we hire are actual professional servers, and the requirement of having a TAP certification is a minimum. Once they are TAP certified, we then have subsequent trainings to ensure that they are intimately aware with the different limits that are afforded in each license type. But what must be noted is just because you have the limit afforded to you in the license type, we still have an obligation to serve responsibly to our community. So because the limit is provided there, it doesn't mean that we are creating a situation where we encourage every single person to max out on each limit. So despite the limits, the professional service aspect of it never goes away. And then from an administrative perspective, how do we track it? What we have created in-house is basically our own sheet, which uses an identification marker and identifies the customer and puts a tab in one of 3 different categories depending on what they're consuming. And in an effort to do this, our case room currently is pretty small, but we maintain a very high ratio of employees to staff so that the staff can use the tool that we've given them to identify which customer has had what limit in which category of license. And then that is redundantly backed up with putting that information into the POS system so that if someone else, for whatever reason, comes in to put in an order, they will also have that information that can be shared by a manager or another server who is there. Randomly kind of do audits ourselves by asking friends to come in and attempt to purchase more and see if how they're responded to. So I think those are some basic standards that can be put forward to alleviate some of the concerns with overconsumption or exceeding any particular license types.
Thank you. This is to the chair. I think maybe just to clarify, my concern was less in regard to over-service and more on the administrative side of maintaining what was originally legislative intent with respect to the volume limitations. I think this is an admittedly very complex issue, and I would encourage industry to come forward with maybe some of what you've described as your internal operational best practices, and maybe provide some input to us as the regulators to make sure that we're not creating something that is onerous or untenable. But at the same time, I would make the comment that I think just philosophically that the legislative intent, having been there back in the good old days of 2005, 06, when this legislation was passed, I helped pass it, that the intent was to support small manufacturers. And I think with the evolution of industry, that now what we're seeing is more incursion into what would be traditionally considered retail activities. And I think we as a board need to be mindful of those intrusions into our traditional retailers and how sort of the pie becomes allocated, if you will, in what I think is potentially a zero-sum game. So that's a general comment, but I would encourage you, Sasan, and members of the Brewers Guild and the Distillers Guild to maybe give some thought to how things are tracked and how, as we go forward with this issue, that we can do this without creating real difficulty for you and make sure that it's being done properly. So appreciate your input.
Thank you.
I think the consensus is that this needs more study. But Paul, would you like to address this?
Paul Thomas with Alaska Cash Liquor here in Juneau. I think, as Glenn alluded to, this was based on a sampling room, a tasting room, and when we start expanding to multiple types of manufacturing using this, we're going past that. When we have one room that's serving cocktails, beer, and wine, we have a BDL. And if we're potentially having 3 different limits, we're really getting into the realm of a BDL. If this is even a concept that we want to carry on, I think they should have their own taste. But if it's a concept we're going to carry on, there should be a defined combined limit, whatever they're a brewery with a distillery, whatever the tasting limit is for that tasting room, be something brewery tasting or DDL, or I'm sorry, distillery tasting. It shouldn't be an additional set of tasting rights. If they want the additional tasting rights, an additional tasting room.
Thank you, Paul. Go ahead.
Through the chair, I just have a question. Being a public member, I obviously don't have the experience or expertise. But to me, it just seems simple that if you have several manufacturing licenses, and you can explain to me instantly why this is a bad idea. But if I have 5 manufacturing licenses, which I know, why would the limit change? I mean, you get 3 drinks. Looks like that's what they're limiting it to, like 3 beers, 3 wines, 3 whatever. So you can just mix them. But they can get 3 drinks no matter. I mean, is that just overly simplistic?
So I like that. The problem comes in that the 3 drinks vary. So we would have to define what we consider to be a drink in beer, a drink in wine, and a drink in liquor. But then you've done it. I pointed out at the beginning there is a significant difference in the ethanol content in an ounce for what we currently prescribe in the total ounces. But yeah, that's the approach we need. You can have 3, you can have 2, you can have whatever. And then there's a combination. It does, on the surface, does sound awfully simple, doesn't it?
Just as a public member.
Exactly. No, you're right. You're right. Thank you. Thank you. But I think we are, to Paul's comment, I think we are all talking about how we limit the single customer, regardless of how many licenses, manufacturing licenses are supplying. And what we need is just to cobble the right number.
Chairman Klein,
Go ahead.
May I make a quick addition to the discussion as it's evolved into individual service limits and how we differentiate ourselves? It should be noted that a manufacturer's tasting room is very different than a beverage dispensary license. First and foremost, there's limits of hours of operations. There are restraints put in place with regard to entertainment, and no stools at the counter, no television. So the conversation of the fact that you can have these different types of alcoholic beverages in one location, making it in essence a beverage dispensary license, isn't exactly the case for us. And what I think the intent of the tasting room was to give folks an opportunity to come in, have a sampling, and to be able to then become familiar with the product that this individual manufacturer is producing. And for us, the sales that we do in our tasting room only account for about 3% of what we manufacture. And so in terms of our net zero gain with regard to other retailers in the area, specific to us, we don't have a beverage dispensary license within 16 miles of us. We do have tourism licenses that are close by. But I think that I would respectfully ask that as you guys are having this conversation, realize there is an existing license holder that has been working within the confines of the statutes as they were written for 3 years now. And I would just respectfully ask that you consider as you move forward that we do employ people, that these are good, well-paying year-round jobs, and if you, as you make your decisions moving forward with regard to this issue, that you're sensitive to the fact that there is a license holder out there that this could impact. So please take that into consideration as well.
Thanks. What I'm going to do with this issue is I'm going to form a committee of me and get a hold of the Brewers Guild and there's a couple of cideries and wineries I want to talk to, and distillers, and come up with a reasonable approach as Sarah described it. So we'll bring this back to the board. Thank you. let's move on to fines for violations, which is tab 5. Director.
Mr. Chair. At the October, I put 2017, but I really meant 2018 meeting in Kenai, Mr. Evans has raised the issue, which is not the first time he's raised it, about whether or not the board can have a schedule of fines to be issued with violations, for instance, not having required server education. And the staff and the notes, we looked carefully at the statute. They are written in such a way that the board can only impose a fine upon a licensee, either as part of an accusation or if the licensee has been convicted of a violation of Title IV or the regulations or an applicable ordinance. So it's not possible for the board to impose a fine in any other situation. There either has to be an accusation that comes from the director or there has to be a court. This does change in the Title IV rewrite. The whole sort of structure is changed in that the small V violations become large V violations, kind of like traffic tickets, that non-compliance with certain sections of statute become these large V violations. The enforcement staff would essentially write a ticket. Most of those violations are punishable by fines of $250. Some specifically raise that to $500. The bill, a couple are lower, having a fine of $100. So going forward, if SB 52 passes, everything will change, but at this time there is...
The conference is now in listen-only mode.
There's no way for the board to issue civil fines except under those two very specific circumstances.
Director, thank you. There's two issues here. One is the issues were raised by Mr. Evans, and if we can stall for one more meeting, but seriously, his concerns were raised by the stakeholders during the whole process of rewriting Title IV, and one of the first things that everybody agreed on was the new scheme of fines imposed for violations and tickets being written rather than go through the onerous system. I think we need to give that a try. It looks like 52 will make it through this session. If it doesn't, I think we ought to take a look at how we might take that portion, as we did with minors, take that portion out of whatever's in contention and bring it forward. Because it really does answer the frustration Mr. Evans has expressed, we've all expressed, in that before we can impose discipline on the smallest thing, we have to go through this rather onerous procedure. So I would suggest that we hold this in abeyance until... Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I wasn't suggesting any action. I was just trying to respond to issues that Mr. Evans had raised more than once to sort of get a definitive answer of what the board could or couldn't do at this time. And I appreciate the history from the Title IV Steering Committee because you were so involved for so long.
Excellent. Thank you, Director. Okay.
Is this the work? No, this is just for work. Oh.
I had to unplug that, which I think helped with the phone issue.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I'd like to move on to tab number 6, which is enforcement, and we need Jim on the line.
The conference is no longer in listen-only mode.
And Jim, before this is Jim Holcher, who is our enforcement supervisor. And Jim, before you begin, I want to duplicate the comments that I made to the director. The information that you included in our packet was very welcome, and it was very thoughtful, and because all of the information we're sent, we all did go through it. In addition, it was available to the public, and I recommend the public read the enforcement report as well, because it's got some great information on the scope of enforcement. And but what you have today is some real questions that we need answers to, and that is, what is your understanding of how your department will, what do you know, what do you suspect, and what should we know? James, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know that the board has had some time to review the report, but prior to me moving on to answering some questions, I just want to reiterate that everything regarding alcohol control has a domino effect. And I'm not with us, but it starts with concerned people, involved parents, involved communities. And I think that we're starting to see that with alcohol there is a bit of education going on, and we have something good going on that I can sum it up at least locally within Anchorage. Because of alcohol enforcement, not only by us but by local police departments, the troopers, one of the direct benefits of that is shown within the Anchorage School District. In reviewing the Anchorage District's detailed behavior suspensions for the year 16-17, there was 42 alcohol suspensions. In 17-18, there was 81 alcohol suspensions. The current year, there is 18. So I think that there's at least a direct relation to everything that's going on with education, with enforcement. And as you can see from some of the information that I provided, there's a big reason why alcohol enforcement directly correlates to public safety. So
that came through loud and clear.
Okay, thank you.
I appreciate that. The issue that is of most importance to the board right now, that's not important, most immediacy to the board right now is the whole issue of, do we have an enforcement group? Are they able to accomplish their mission, given what the director described as far as limitations on information? And finally, what do you see as the future of enforcement?
Not as effectively or independently as we have been doing in the past years. Of course, removing our only way to research and to get information on individuals, businesses, the main area, once I remove that, has created a bottleneck, a huge bottleneck for us. And, things have improved with getting information from the state troopers. I can tell you the very first instance that we had an investigation for something that was going to occur on January 5th. We requested information on January 2nd. We did not receive that information until the end of January. So I don't want to say because of that delay it caused for an illegal activity to occur, but it definitely did not help with that. And I know that's probably one of the more extreme examples I can give, but it is a real example that did occur, and I hope that it would not repeat itself, but this definitely has had some impact on enforcement.
James, without naming names or giving us too much detail, could you describe how this impedes your investigations?
Right after lunch.
Well, let me find a way to summarize this. We requested information on, I believe, 4 individuals, 2 suspects, regarding misconduct involving controlled substance sale, suspected sales, and event that was going to be held that was inviting individuals on social media to partake in that event. Enforcement was not or could not contact the individuals without the information we requested.
James, we got this problem with the phone again. We're losing you. let me just see what we can do about it.
Mr. Chair, perhaps we should hang up and dial back in, and if everybody who's on the phone can remember, if you're not talking to the board, please mute. I think that probably affects the situation.
Okay, we're going to give it a try. Sorry, James, but we're going to hang up on everybody and ask you to call back. And again, when you call back, if you're not testifying, please put your phone on.
Welcome to the GCI conference. Thank you. Please stand by. If you are the chairperson, press the star key now. Your conference will begin when the chairperson arrives. Please wait. You will now be placed into conference. There are 5 participants in the conference.
Did you get that, Ken? Okay, James, let's try this again.
Okay. So I'll restart. There was an event that involved, I believe, 3 or 4 people, individuals, of which 2 might have been suspects, and I'm doing this completely off memory, so forgive me. And we could not get the information based off of it on those 2 individuals to see if they had any active, what their criminal history was, to see if that they had any officer safety flag. And the individuals were not contacted because that's one of the reasons why they weren't contacted. And the event passed, so we had to start on a new investigation regarding the same individuals, because these individuals are reoccurring violators, so to speak. So that's just one example. I'm trying to press for numerous other ones, but I foresee a huge problems that this can and will cause with shoulder taps, fine checks, if investigators are out, going out and starting to conduct these types of things. And I think we've laid out quite a bit of those in memos, to include my memo presented at the last meeting. So unless there's specific questions, I don't know what else you guys would want. I haven't heard anything new about consolidating investigative units. I'm pretty much as versed in that as everybody else that might be listening or might have presented. So I guess with that, I'm not sure how that's going to impact us to the board.
That gives us some idea. Ladies and gentlemen, if you are listening in, please mute your phone. It's playing havoc with our system here. Okay, James. Go ahead.
Okay, is that better?
Much. Thank you.
Okay. So I guess I can answer any questions the board might have regarding some of the things I've talked about, or I really don't want to speculate on anything about the move, but I do have a lot of questions. I'm not sure how it's going to affect us or the board. So with that, Mr. Chair, do you have any questions?
Just one, have you had any contact from the governor's staff on getting this system moving, or are you waiting to hear?
I have not had any contact from the governor's.
Thank you. We have a question from Sarah.
Hi, James. This is Sarah Erickson from Kenai. I have a question as far as the additional cut to travel that I saw for the AMCO budget. If you felt like, would that also affect your ability to, will that travel cut affect your ability to go to the rural villages? Or do you see that affecting your ability for enforcement, or how are you feeling about that?
It already has affected enforcement. Under the previous administration, travel for enforcement was delegated to the director. And it was pretty simplified, where we would notify her of the reason why we needed to travel. whether it was inspection or investigation, and we would travel out to these communities or to the rural areas in a fairly quick amount of time. Recently, we've been requested to give at least 2 weeks notice prior to travel, maybe even in, a smaller investigation. So, and we're having to justify quicker travel for investigative purposes, which has started to consume a little more of our time. So we're starting to deal with things a little more, having a little more administrative, I guess, restrictions, which is causing us more work to get the work that we naturally would do to report to the boards.
Thank you, James. Other questions or comments? This is our, we need to buy. Okay, James, we had an inordinate amount of trouble hearing you, but it finally came through. Thank you for your patience, and thank you for your report. I'd like to move now. Thank you. I'd like to move now to accusations.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Two things. So first, would you like us to try to call in on a cell phone rather than this system and see if that improves the situation?
Whatever you do.
We'll try that. And then we have the notices of violations issued and licensee responses in tab 7, and the board had asked that we bring to the board's attention anything we thought was significant, and Mr. Holscher will have a couple to point out to the board.
Okay.
So give us 2 minutes to change the phone, and we're going to have to hang up and dial in again because you'll have to be the meeting leader, whatever it's called.
Director, which phone do you want me to call?
The chairperson has disconnected. The conference will now end. Welcome to the GCI Conference Center. Thank you. Please stand by. You will now be placed into conference. There are 11 participants in the conference.
It's on page 1, license 4526 Gold Miners Lodge. If you review that NOV, you'll see that the owners have leased their property and have been operating throughout 2018. They left the state in October of 2017. They entered in a lease agreement with John and Indria Zakovi on October 15th, 2017. Part of the agreement reads, description of premises, leasee leases from lessor the business liquor license relating to and real property located in the Palmer Recording District, 3rd Judicial District, State of Alaska, which property is more particularly described as follows. Address 20333 West Parks Highway, Houston, Alaska. 2. Use of premises. Subject to the terms of the conditions of this lease, lessees shall use a premises solely for the purpose of operating a restaurant, lounge, lodge, and related purposes, and for no other use until a leaser has expressed agreed in advance by email. An email was sent to myself explaining the NOV that was written regarding leasing the licensee and financial interest. That has been attached to the NOV. The explanation was sent back to me on December 9th, 2018, confirming that they have not been operating in 2018. The second paragraph, they state that Backy's don't have financial interest in Gold Miners Lodge, but only the property, and will be starting their own business under a different name and license. Since they have given up their interest in this property, it is a recommendation that the board take a closer look at this, since they no longer have interest into the property. As you know, somebody cannot have a liquor license without right, title, or interest.
Director, you want to weigh in on this one, because there's a description here that says they've been continually trying to comply, and there's been communication.
Mr. Chair, this situation is on my list of things to do to look more closely and possibly bring an accusation to the board depending on the situation. So on my list, I have a very long
I think that's where it goes. Okay, James, what's the next one?
Okay, next one is page 35 on the notices of violation, license number 5651 Brewery, the Black Spruce Brewing Company. If you review that, you will see that they had a violations of minors on premises. In a nutshell, the brewery does not have a restaurant designation permit. Thus, they can't have anyone under 21 years of age working within the licensed premises.
Well, still trying to get down to this one.
Okay. Next one, page 44, is server education for license 3759, Beverage Dispensary Tourism. If you see, they were written a violation of server education, and they were checked on August 15, 2018. The expired time on the TAPS card was July 26, 2017, 13 months after they were contacted. And lastly, I'd want to point out on page 48, there's 3 total NOVs to Alaska Proof Distillery. Each one of them having their varying degrees of, I guess, importance, but I guess what's important to note is they received 3 NOVs in a short amount of time. And that's license 5613 Alaska Spirits LLC, and they were for ad pricing and marketing. And for the name change, or the name on the building, 304185. And another one for pricing and marketing.
Okay. Director, it's you. Working on the minutes.
Mr. Chair, I certainly add to my list to create accusations where I think are warranted, but I'm always happy if the board weighs in to let me know the ones that they particularly want to see as well.
Through the chair,
go ahead.
I see a lot of what I consider administrative NOVs with regard to what appear to be.
I'm not going to answer now.
Some
He did.
notification regarding change of ownership where there's not what I would consider a substantial concern regarding public health or anything else. Those are fairly minor, and I think could be handled by the director without further action. There we're helping educate members, industry members, and keeping things in order. And I applaud staff and James's crew for keeping track of these things, but I don't think there needs to be penalty associated with them aside from notification and education. So with that said, with regard to violations concerning minors on premise and pricing and marketing, I do have a much greater concern that I believe there should be much closer scrutiny and follow-up on those specific issues.
But is there a category of pricing that you have concerns with, or just?
I think, generally speaking, and it's not specific to any one NOV because there are several instances of it in this packet, but with respect to small manufacturer or tasting rooms, anything that where they are treading into what is considered traditional retailer activities, I think there needs to be more education done on that front. I'm not interested in seeing egregious penalties, but I believe that there are so many new people coming into this market. I think there are several new applications in this agenda, but I feel there may be a shortfall in education for all these new licensees. Certainly they're responsible for following the rules, but there are certainly also lots of opportunities for these new licensees to run afoul of what may seem minor can lead to concerning, but I think it's a shortcoming in education, personally. So I think but with respect to pricing and marketing, education. So,
I want to set it on speakers. They had things that they had in
question.
I mean, like, the first to get what they are.
Just get one more.
The conference is now in listen-only mode. The conference is no longer in listen-only mode.
They should be able to. Oh. We're going to have a bake sale and raise money for doing my concert. We have one. They can't hear on the phone because they can't. The phone's not picking up. The cell phone's not picking up.
Do you hear that?
Mr. Chair?
Go ahead, James.
If I may, in response to the education aspect, enforcement does a large amount of education, and specifically regarding the licensee who had 3 NOVs in a row, we reached out as a NOV, and to remind the board, NOV is the communication tool that enforcement uses to educate, to pass on information, to open that door for licensees to know that there was a violation that occurred. And what that has done is stimulate communication with numerous licensees to the effect of them complying with our regulations. As you can see, one of the concerning things when we kind of pitch that ball back and forth about education is there's still concern with enforcement where when we get a response back from a licensee saying that our information is incorrect, it's only off of merchandise alone. And when enforcement follows up a couple of weeks later and double checks and verifies that the information that was provided to us as an enforcement, that it was only alpha merchandise, inaccurate, and further advertising regulations were violated. It draws, I guess, concern from enforcement, because how much of this, are we actually looking at this in the total, or is this, are we doing enough education? At what point does enforcement become the issue where a licensee, after numerous attempts of trying to educate, is still ignoring our regulations or our laws? So I would agree that a large amount goes into education, but I will also stand by our statistics that show that enforcement does educate, that does work with licensees, and a lot of times when you read through the notices of violations to include their responses and sometimes a follow-up memo or response for the board's edification on the entire circumstance, I think all of that needs to be taken in totality.
Through the chair, James, I completely agree with that. And if I'm kind of looking through your packet, and if you're coming across what you see as willful disregard, or conversely, just lack of control of activities on licensed premises or pricing marketing features, then to me that represents a special case and should be acted upon. So I would agree with you on that.
Well, I appreciate that, Mr. Brady, and that's the reason why I pointed this out as one of the ones that I think the board needed to look at and understand that we view that as a problem.
I wonder if that's on that.
Other questions? Nope. Okay.
No.
I'd like to move on to accusations. And Director, we have tabs 8, 9, and 10. This is license 4965, Picolinos in Wasilla, 4390, Victor Alaska Ale House, Restaurant Eating Place in Anchorage, and 5559, Picolinos, Restaurant Eating Place in the Eagle River. Should we take these all at once or separately?
So first of all, Mr. Chair, we have called IT, so I don't know if you want to take a break and wait for them to see if we can figure out something on the phone issue before we get started. In response to your question, these 3 licenses all relate to a divorced couple, and it appears to me that the first 2 are more related to Mr. Francisco Rodriguez, and the third one is more related to Ms. Tara Prisa. I don't know how to pronounce her name. So it might be difficult to take the first 2 together and the third one separately.
Okay. Well, we'll do that after the break. Let's IT break.
And
how long do you need?
Well, we're waiting for the IT staff to come down. I think we'll hang up and call back in on the big conference phone, because I don't think people can hear the board talk from the cell phone.
So should we keep going until IT gets here?
Well, I'm just worried about having to break in the middle of the talking about the accusations. That doesn't seem reasonable.
Well, let's start with a 15-minute break. That's not enough. We'll do more.
Thank you.
The chairperson has disconnected. The conference will now end.